Welcome, folks, to another episode of That Anita Live, emotional healing to help you create a happier life. I'm Anita, your host, and this week we're discussing earning the impossible. As a pregnant teen, my guest today very quickly fell on hard times, living at times without heat and running water. Though she barely had a roof over her head, what she did have was the desire to achieve. In her fight to improve her life, she managed to get the one thing that has proven to successfully enhance and upgrade any situation you may find yourself in. She managed to get a college education, earning not just her bachelor's degree, but also her doctorate degree from Yale University. Welcome to the show, Dr. Deborah March. Hey, Dr. Deb.
Hi. Thank you.
How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
How is your weekend going so far?
It's going very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
No, thank you for coming.
Of course.
So now, let's go back to you first finding out that you were pregnant as a teen.
Okay.
What was going through your head and your heart at that time?
So I guess we have to back up just a little bit, even maybe further,
Okay.
because I left home when I was pretty young. So I was 16. And I think, you know, I have to say about my parents that they're incredible people. They've influenced me so much. They're examples of the sort of people who resist the position that the world has given them. So my mother, you know, in her 40s, without a degree, without a driver's license, without any friends or family, she goes back to school, gets her college degree. Now she's a teacher in a school where kids walk through the metal detector and they don't go to any other class except Miss Wolf's English class. Yes, at 40, she changed her entire life. And she lost like 80 pounds, like she just was fabulous, right? My father, similarly, he was a person who definitely was on his grind. You know, when I was born, he worked at the Fulton Fish Market. My mother used to make him, you know, strip down to his drawers on the front stoop before he came in the house.
Leave the smell outside.
That's right.
Leave the smell outside.
And he went from that to being, you know, a private investigator, Al Pacino's bodyguard. You know, he was a small business owner, all kinds of things. And so they're these incredible people who just loom large in my own self-fashioning and my own sense of who I am. That being said, I had a difficult relationship with them when I was younger, and
I can see why. Because with all of the independence and opinion they had, okay, you just naturally took all of that on. Right. And I mean, how could you not have a strained relationship with them?
So I was a willful child. And you know, when I was 16, I was sexually assaulted by a person that I knew my entire life. And the way that it was handled in my family, at the time I felt like I needed to leave the home. And so informally, I kind of couch surfed a little bit, and then, you know, by the time I was 17, I was formally living on my own in my own apartment with my future son's father. So it was sort of us against the world at that time, you know. I started college, and the month before I started college.
Now, did you find college, or did college find you? Because you went to City College of New York,
I
right?
did. And City College of New York was recently ranked #2 in the nation for upward mobility for its students. And so, you know, when we talk about why people are able to change their lives, it's really not a story of individual kind of up by your bootstraps narrative. Nobody gets where they are on their own.
Right.
And so it's really about investing in those institutions that make those kinds of transformations possible. Fortunately for me, in high school I tested into, I guess, you know, Stuyvesant High School. It was the magnet school for science and mathematics. And because I was there, there was this new scholarship just for 10 kids. Whoever wanted to go to City College gets a free ride, $10,000 a year. They get a laptop computer. They get a pass to get into
so the $10,000 was a stipend, not towards tuition.
Stipend on top of that, yeah. So free tuition, stipend, and then because I was well below the poverty line, I was also a full Pell Grant student, and so I had that over on top. And there were a number of public and private actors who invested in my education, and without those things, I certainly wouldn't have been able to get through a semester, never mind 4 years.
So how did you find out that you actually tested and were approved for this program?
This program was totally new. The announcement was made over the loudspeaker, and you know, Stuyvesant is kind of like TJ, like everybody. They had an acronym in Stuyvesant. Shh. Stuyvesant Harvard heaven. So the idea was you're on your way to the Ivy League, and that wasn't as important to me. What was important to me was getting the kind of education that allowed me to answer pressing questions I've always had about my world and my place within that world. And also, of course, what was important was me being able to actually get through the education in a very systematic and concrete material way. And so when I heard about this scholarship, I was first in line in the office of the guidance counselor, finding out more. The 10 of us who were accepted, it was an incredible opportunity not only to go to a world-class institution that has such a fascinating history in this country of allowing immigrants and folks who are excluded from prestigious universities to have a chance in this life, but it also was a place where, because these private actors had invested in my education, they were interested in hearing my story, and they were interested in hearing how I was doing. And so me, this kind of bridge and tunnel Queens girl who you know, would pass by these penthouses that loomed in the distance on my way to school, like I was invited up to these penthouses for these fundraisers, right? And these men would ask me, stand up, tell my story, talk about what it was that I was receiving, what it was that I was able to do as a result, and what my goals were. Very few of us at 18 are asked, number one, asked that question. What is it that you're trying to do, right? So even in just crafting that narrative and telling that story, it helped me have a better sense of who I was and who I wanted to be. And then the fact that people with power cared to listen to that story.
Do you remember the tidbits of that story? What you would tell them?
That's fascinating. Yes. Yes, I do. It's very similar to what I'm telling you today, which is that, you know, no one in my family had done a PhD before. No one on my block had considered going to graduate school before. I had never met a professor. And so by the time I got to college, because my first semester English professor, Mary Soliday, noticed that I was very nerdy about literature. I would email her long after class was over with footnoted emails about Toni Morrison, and you know, she said, I think that you belong in academia. And it was a life of the mind. It was a life that I hadn't considered for myself. And so I would talk about the ways in which this scholarship and this institution made possible a vision of myself that I wouldn't have had before.
So you're in City College, and you're living where?
So at that time,
because City College doesn't have dorms, correct?
Oh no, now it does. Now it does. So they're coming up in the world. But back then I was commuting to school. I was commuting 3 subways and 1 bus. So it took
one way.
Oh yes, one way. So I can walk you through my day if you want. So yes, I was living in a kind of an illegal converted space, and I do want to talk to you about how I found housing, because housing is such a pressing issue right now, and like my experience I think reflects a broader kind of experience that is much more common today. But in any case, I was living in this kind of converted, like, 2-room space in somebody's house, and because the landlord was in the process of renovating this home, he would regularly turn off the water. And you know, I was bottle feeding my son, and so that was a very, like, doing that without much notice put me in an interesting position in terms of making sure my son was fed and bathed. Certainly heat was an issue.
And how do you do without heat in New York?
You wear a coat to bed and you cuddle your child.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And so I would wake up, you know, 5:36 in the morning, get my son ready, and I put all my 18 credits on 2 days a week, because there was this lovely woman in my mother's neighborhood, which was about a half-hour bus ride away. There was a lovely woman named Marguerite who would watch kids for $50 a day. So if I could put it on fewer days, I would save money. And so I traveled the half hour with the diaper bag and my backpack and my baby and all that. I drop him off with all his bottles prepared, and she had a couple of other kids and a dog that she was watching, and she would, you know, sit him down, and they didn't do much during the day, but she was a very loving woman, and he would stay there till 9, 10 o'clock at night, because I had all my classes, you know. It would take me about 2 hours to go from, you know, the Bayside, it's like, where she lived, is like last stop on the bus to the first stop on the bus, right? And then you get on the 7 train, last stop on the 7 train to the first stop on the 7 train, 42nd Street, then you transfer up the 2, and then at 96th Street, you transfer into the 1.
Do you want
yes. But then I'd make it up there, you know. I'd make it up there, and once I was there, I was like any other student there. I was there to learn, and I was there. There were so many other young people and working adults with fascinating stories who had less investment made in their lives than I did in mine. So for example, one of my closest friends at school was an undocumented immigrant, and so she had to pay her full tuition. She was not qualified for any Pell Grant. She wasn't qualified for any private assistance anyway. Full-time working, full-time taking care of her elders at home, going to school all day, and it was a struggle. She certainly didn't make it out in 4 years the way that I did, because I had the fortune of having people take interest in my experience.
You said once that going to City College opened you up to possibilities. Yes. What did that mean?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is, seeing what I'm capable of, understanding what it is that I'm capable of. A lot of this comes down to your voice, you know, finding your voice, but also finding out that you have not just permission but authority to use your voice in public. I certainly was always like that nerdy kid, right? And so I felt in the classroom. Of course, send the footnotes to the teacher after I it's pretty clear. And so I always was very comfortable in the classroom space. But outside of the classroom, I felt very much as though I needed to know every single thing on a particular topic before I could speak up about it, even if it was an issue I cared very much about. And you know, when I saw injustice in the world, or when I saw something going on in my home or in my personal relationships, I felt as though my voice was neither welcome nor effective. And I think what I was able to see at City College, not only from my classes and my professors, but also from my peers, was that it's my responsibility to use my voice to make change in the world. And I think it's about the power of the individuals whom I admired telling me that and granting me that permission and that example.
So tell me about a time or a moment when you're in this makeshift basement apartment, if I can call it an apartment, and you felt like you were not going to make it.
Yeah, I can definitely come up with a couple of examples like that. So I didn't have a car, I didn't drive, and so it would be 9 o'clock, 9:30. I'm coming home off this bus. You know how mass transit is, even in a place like New York, and there's no groceries in the house because my son's father and I, we had a pretty rough relationship, and maybe he didn't come home that day, or maybe he refused to do the grocery shopping. And so now I know that the grocery store is 1.5 miles away, and I have an infant, and it's cold outside, and there's nothing to eat.
And there's probably 3 feet of snow outside.
Sometimes there is, right? And I can certainly remember pushing that red cart that I had, those red carts for the groceries. Finding a way to kind of balance his car seat on this red cart, getting him 1.5 miles down the road, getting the groceries I needed, pushing it all the way back, and just carrying everything little by little down these stairs. And just, to be honest with you, at the time, I was raised an atheist, but I had this born-again experience when I was 16, and what was important to me in those low moments was being thankful, was praising. At that time, that meant praising God. So just for the air in my lungs, just for the fact that I could walk down these stairs, just for the fact that I'm holding a healthy child in my hands as I walk through this cold apartment. That act of being thankful was very important in giving me perspective that this too shall pass, and that in this low moment there's still so much for me to be grateful for.
And we'll be right back to hear more about how she went from City College, New York to Yale.
Welcome to That Anita Live TV on YouTube. Here at That Anita Live, I share episodes about emotional healing to help you create a happier life. How do I do that? Through awareness, education, and most importantly, you, the community. By sharing tips and techniques from real people with real stories of overcoming trauma and abuse to live relentless lives. Hanging out with me, you'll laugh, you'll learn, but most importantly, you'll heal. Never miss a moment. Subscribe to That Anita Live's YouTube channel today. Subscribe via thatanitalive.com/YouTube.
And we're back to hear more of this extraordinary story from Dr. Deb Marsh. How did you get from City College to Yale?
Well, I guess there are a couple different really important factors there. The first being the mentorship I received at City College. So having Mary Soliday, but also having a program called the City College Fund, which along with the Mellon Fellowship was a program that was designed to identify folks from underrepresented groups who are considering a career in academia, just to make sure that when we get to college, the people who are teaching our students reflect the student body themselves. And so this was a program that was, constructed around identifying working class students and women and folks of color and first-generation Americans who are interested in pursuing a PhD who otherwise wouldn't have considered it. So fortunately, I got scooped up within this program, and I became part of this band of nerds who would meet every month and do research and find out about opportunities and support one another in our applications for fellowships. And that's the second piece, is that because I had this guidance, I was able to apply for something called the Jacob K. Javits Fellowship, which supports, it's a very similar story to my undergrad. It supports 6 years of study in the humanities for a PhD. It's a very generous full ride plus $30,000 stipend, and then Yale University offered health insurance as well. And so, I couldn't say no to a situation like that. I was deciding between Cornell and Yale finally when all the applications rolled in, and Cornell offered free childcare. But when I looked around at the community in which Cornell was located, I realized that I'd really be isolated from my family and my support network. And I've found when you're trying to become a fuller, better version of yourself, you want family around, at least as long as you have the right kind of family. And so I knew, Yale was about an hour and a half away from my home, and it was important for me to have that connection. So
when did the relationship between you and your parents begin to turn around and become?
The birth of my son. Yeah.
Okay.
So my older son, his name is Jadis, and a child brings so much new possibility into the world. And
yeah, because Mama's sitting back thinking that she don't know what she's doing out there with my grandchild.
That's right. That's right. So a big part of that is absolutely my mother wanted to make sure that her only grandchild, this beautiful young baby, is having every opportunity that he deserves in life, and regardless of the difficulties we have between one another, there's someone far more important now. And so it puts everything in perspective. And I think the other thing a baby offers a family is a second chance, a chance to do things right, a chance to learn from our mistakes, and this promise for the future. And so my son brought a lot of beauty back into my family, which was just a wonderful
drew everybody
gift. Drew everybody together. That's right.
In your education, when you made a vocation choice, why did you choose teaching?
Teachers changed my life. There's no question to me. So many people in my family are teachers.
Because you're a third-generation teacher.
That's right, yeah.
So I was wondering if that had a play in you choosing to become a teacher.
Yes. For a long time, I resisted that. I guess I would call it a calling at this point. We may as well. I resisted that. My grandfather was an English teacher in New York City Public Schools. My mother is an English teacher in New York City Public Schools. My uncle, my cousin, so many, my aunt. And I respect the work that they do so much, but I also saw that the profession was changing and that teachers have less power over their classrooms, more and more so, I think, each day with each political kind of onslaught. And so, and I thought as well, I want to be a professor, right? I want to get my PhD, and I want to research and publish, and it's very important to me to be able to impact a field, and all of that is, of course, crucial work, crucial intellectual work. But what I found when I was at Yale and I was doing my research and presenting at conferences and teaching undergraduates is that there's an element of preaching to the choir, right? You can certainly do things in a college classroom that you can't do in a high school classroom. Yes. But at the same time, everyone I was talking to, whether it be my colleagues or my students, they already had fully formed their habits of mind, the ways in which they engaged the world and understood texts. Whereas when it was not purposeful, but I took a position in my last year of graduate school as a long-term substitute English teacher at Robinson Secondary School, a public school. And when I began working with these high school students, I saw that I was working with future engineers and doctors and food service workers and mothers and fathers and people who might not pursue an English degree or a degree in African American studies, that I could introduce to a new way of looking at the world, a new set of questions, a new way of understanding their place in relation to others. And that really attracted me.
So, as a teacher, because you just mentioned teachers are losing their power in the classroom, or they have just completely already lost their power in the classroom.
Yes.
What is teacher autonomy?
Yeah, so it's really important to me as I think about what it means to teach at its root, right? What it means is that you're developing a relationship with a student that allows that student to become his or her fuller, better, more beautiful self. Like at its heart, right? That's what it is. It's a relationship between two people. Teachers are on the front lines in the classroom of helping students negotiate their relationship to academic fields, as well as to one another, as well as their position in the world. What that means, in my view, is that teachers, as both the subject matter experts and the people who know their students best, that teachers need to be invested with the power to make those decisions in the classroom about what and how their students learn. Unfortunately,
so in choosing textbooks,
setting the curriculum, setting the pacing. Like, think about that. You know, I can give an example. Recently, I had a student who was in one of my AP language classes, right? I teach at a small private high school right now called Loudoun School for the Gifted. And this student, brilliant, you know, incisive, inquisitive, anxious, so anxious. And we're in the middle of this unit on rhetorical analysis and, you know, like in the other contexts in which I've taught AP literature and language, there's a very strict sense of pacing. All the teachers must be in lockstep because we're being evaluated based on a common assessment that's set from above that we all need to comply with. And that's one of the measures by which it's decided how well we're doing. But this student, she needed me when we had this side conversation, and I realized both her passion for poetry and her anxiety around some of the work that we were doing in the class. She needed us to slow down a little bit, right? She needed us to take a break. She needed me to acknowledge, both in my instructional design and in my interactions with her, that she was a human being who was experiencing a thing right now that I could help guide her through. And so that ability to pace my lessons, to decide how quickly I'm going to teach and then assess a particular skill based on what I'm seeing in the students, where they are. That kind of power, it's ultimately about my ability to treat students as human beings rather than as cogs in a machine. And if I can't do that as a teacher, if I am being evaluated precisely on my ability to ignore their humanity, then teaching loses its meaning, it loses its power. It's really ultimately not about protecting human dignity or allowing us to flourish.
Now, in the current political climate, there have been laws changed and where some of the power in education is returning back to the states. What would you say to the critic of that change that says teachers mistreat students or teachers use their power not for good and some students get treated better than others?
So I'd say a couple of things there. One, this question between the federal and state and then local control of schools is one fraught with history. And there's a very good reason why the federal government has an incentive structure that has states complying with its demands. And that reason is that poor students and students from underrepresented communities were getting left behind, right? And we can't ignore that history when we begin to advocate for teacher autonomy. And I would argue shifting the power away from the federal government toward the states doesn't rectify that problem in any way, nor does it when you shift the power from the states to the teacher if those teachers reflect the same ideology that produced that marginalization and oppression in the first place. All of that being said, I think the question for me is not shifting power away from the federal government toward the states. It's about creating in schools as well as in quite frankly, as far as my politics goes, all workplaces, creating a far more democratic organization within the workplace so that the folks who do the work have a say about how their job gets done, both for efficiency's sake, because they're the ones doing the job and they understand how it needs to get done.
See, what I see now is that nerd that did all of that research.
Yes. Why do you have to call me out?
And the more you speak, the more passionate you become about it. So it's like she has spent some years studying this and understanding.
My husband knows not to ask me certain questions because I won't stop for a good 30 minutes.
The relationship between the federal and the state and the local. How do schools go about making that change?
That's a great question. I was just asking a journalist from NPR exactly this question because she had gone across the country. She was based out of Texas before, and she had researched exactly this question. I asked, like, are there examples of local districts that do this well? And the answer came that it's not districts but schools, that principals have a great deal of autonomy and they decide how much power teachers have or don't have, not over the curriculum, which is really set at the local level by the district, but over the school culture. Over the ways in which students are treated informally, over what happens in non-classroom spaces, over these issues of culture and social organization. And I think that is one of the answers, is training principals to trust teachers and to show them what that would look like, and also elevating those examples of school administrators who do this well.
Gifted. How does a student get identified as being gifted?
This is a fraught question. This is a fraught question. So. There are a couple of different approaches. I can describe the one at my school, but the couple of different approaches are, in essence, this question of, is the nature of being gifted, is it fixed? Is it like you took a test in 2nd grade, the NAT, the COGAT in Fairfax County, right? You took this test and boom, you got 99%, you got 98%. You're gifted, and you're gifted forever. You're always going to receive those services,
so
right?
Does
this
it mean
is one way of
that
looking
it's
at
in one subject or another, or?
So the way that I work in Loudoun County, and I had worked in Fairfax County before, the approach in public school is that they give these aptitude tests, the NAT and the COGAT, and they identify kind of generalized intellectual aptitude across mathematics, spatial reasoning, and then verbal reasoning. And so that fixed attitude is one. There are some critics, and my school would be one of those, where I guess I should say I am one of those critics who, not necessarily my school, who view giftedness as a far more fluid category, wherein, simply students have evolving and developing needs over the course of their academic career, and it's our job as educators to identify those needs and try our very best to meet them. And that's true for special education students, that's true for gifted students. And so giftedness for me, when it's a useful label, that label simply means that the standard curriculum is not meeting the student's needs, and that we, administrators, teachers, parents, student, work together to figure out an individualized plan to meet that student's needs.
Now, do you get to do that at Loudoun School of the Gifted?
Yes, so we do both enrichment and acceleration at Loudoun School for the Gifted. So that means sometimes curriculum compacting. It means like, you know this already. We've tested you or we've informally evaluated you. You can skip this unit, right? You can skip this class. You're a 6th grader, but you're going to be in my AP Literature class this year because you are ready for college content. But you know what? Your math, you're not going to take 12th grade math. You're going to take 4th grade math maybe because that's where you are at that place. And so the size of the school, as well as the ways in which teachers are able to identify and act on what they see, both of those factors allow us to really individualize the educational plan and make sure that giftedness is not so much describing the student as it is the kind of education they're receiving. They should be getting a gifted education, an advanced academic education.
And that's what they get at Loudoun School of the Gifted.
That's what they get.
I'm sure that's what they get having Dr. Deb teach them English.
I certainly hope so.
Sharing your life story to inspire someone else is very noble. Dr. Deb is proof nothing is impossible. If there's something noble you'd like to do, a passion you have, or a dream you'd like to realize, there has been no other time in history to get up and do something about it. Information is available everywhere, but you have to put in the effort to find it and then to put that information to good use. Success is not delivered. It has to be achieved. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Deb, visit loudonschool.org. Make the commitment to start your journey to live your dream today. I'm Anita, your host. Be sure to check out thatanitalive.com for where and when to see our next episode.